Hello, hi. It's me, Brodie Nathaniel Diorsa MacLeod, and I'm still at Nash Ward at Cygnet Qstoke. I've just done some research using AI based on two books that I read. One of them is called Sapiens, which is a pretty good book about evolution and humanity and shit like that. And the other one is called Before the Pyramids, which is sort of a bit woo. There's these two dudes, one of them's called Christopher Knight, the other one's called Alan Butler. They wrote another book called Who Built the Moon, which is kind of some very interesting mathematics conflated with some slightly dubious content. But the document I'm going to read you sort of draws on both of those and looks at some of these really sort of incongruous, mysterious historical inaccuracies that we just don't understand and really have no way of knowing about. So without further ado, I'm going to just open that Ancient Human Migration Mysteries Unveiled file and read it. So it says, move this thing out of the way as well. The phantom fleets of antiquity, genetic anomalies, ancient seafarers, and the evolutionary mystery of global migration. So the prevailing narrative of human history is that fundamentally a terrestrial epic. It's a story of upright apes stepping out of the African savanna, trekking inexorably across the vast expanse of the Eurasian landmass, and chasing magnificent doomed megafauna across the frozen temporary bridge of the Beringa into the Americas. It's a story of footprints in the mud, stone tools in the dirt, and the slow grinding triumph of human endurance over the ice and the earth. However, when the hyper-precise lens of modern paleogenomics is superimposed over the traditional archaeological record, a spectacular and deeply incongruous mystery emerges. The genetic distribution of Homo sapiens across the globe presents a profound evolutionary paradox. So human populations reached remote ocean-locked continents and distant archipelagos tens of thousands of years before the earliest known archaeological evidence of seagoing vessels. So yeah, you have to have a particularly deep hull to cross the sea. We are confronted with a planet populated by isolated haplogroups bearing extreme, undeniable genetic similarities, but across vast, unforgiving oceanic divides. Yet there's absolutely no fossilized crafts. There's no carbon-dated shipwrecks. There's no rudimentary nautical debris from these primordial epochs to account for this spatial distribution. So it's like how the fuck we all got around in the olden days. And when I say olden days, I mean like 50,000 years ago either. How did the DNA of the isolated Australasian populations end up deep within the Amazon rainforest, for example? How did the material genetic markers of the Levantine Middle East find their way into the bloodlines of the indigenous peoples of North American Great Lakes? Mainstream anthropology struggles to explain the logistical nightmares of this ancient, seemingly impossible circumnavigation. Meanwhile, alternative theoretical frameworks ranging from lost Ice Age civilizations to ancient cartographers possessing advanced astrological knowledge attempt to fill the void left by the missing ship. So this comprehensive report delves into the heart of this historical phantom zone by examining the anthropological framework popularized by Yuval Noah Harari and staggering genetic anomalies of population Y, haplogroup X, the deafening silence in maritime archaeology, and the provocative alternative histories proposed by researchers like Christopher Knight and Alan Butler. A new, highly complex feature of early human migration comes into focus. It's an upbeat, intellectually thrilling scientific detective story where the primary instrument of the incredible journey, the prehistoric boat, is entirely missing from global crime scene. Cognitive Revolution and the Sapiens Express. So to understand the sheer magnitude of early human oceanic dispersal, it's essential to first examine the cognitive framework that made such unprecedented cooperation and ambition possible. So in his massively influential and paradigm-shifting anthropological overview, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, historian Yuval Noah Harari posits that the absolute dominance of Homo sapiens on the Earth stems not from sheer physical strength or environmental adaptation or even raw intelligence, but from a profound cognitive revolution that occurred about 70,000 years ago. Now, before this pivotal period, Homo sapiens was merely one of at least 6 different human species inhabiting the Earth simultaneously. The world of 100 millennia ago was walked by Neanderthals, Denisovians, Homo florensis, Homo floresiensis, and others for countless generations. Sapiens possessed no particular ecological advantage over these sibling species. They used simple tools, lived in small localized social groups, and remained largely confined to their ancestral habits. The cognitive revolution, however, fundamentally rewired the human mind. According to Harari, random genetic mutations altered the inner workings of the sapiens brain, enabling an entirely unique form of language and communication. For the very first time in history of life on Earth, humans could speak about things that did not physically exist. The capacity for shared fiction, the ability to invent and collectively believe in myths, gods, lords, tribal identities, and abstract concepts allowed humans to cooperate flexibly in an unprecedented massive numbers. So this abstract coordination is the silent absolute prerequisite for any major maritime exploration. Building a vessel capable of crossing open, violent oceans is an inherently collaborative, multidisciplinary enterprise that completely transcends the immediate day-to-day needs of hunter-gatherer survival. It requires the delayed gratification of felling immense trees, the specialised knowledge of shaping wood and weaving watertight cordage, and the complex logistical provisioning of a craft for a destination that cannot be seen over the horizon. So the global trade networks of today are based on our trust in fictional entities like the dollar and the corporation. Ancient trade and migration required a similar trust in shared tribal myths and celestial gods. So according to Harari's framework, following his cognitive leap, sapiens rapidly acquired the technology, the organisational skills, and the visionary foresight that was necessary to break out of the Afro-Asia aggressively and settle the outer world. Between 70,000 and 30,000 years ago, pretty broad figures there, these newly cognitively empowered early sapiens invented tools such as oil lamps, bows and arrows, and thermal clothing fashioned with bone needles, allowing them to push into the brutal cold of the far north. Yet most paradigm-shifting technology attributed to this era of rapid expansion is the boat. Around 45 to 65,000 years ago, sapiens achieved something magnificent. They somehow crossed the ocean to land in Australia, a vast, isolated continent that had never before been touched by human feet. Harari notes that this arrival transformed sapiens into an ecological serial killers armed with their new cognitive abilities, fire-stick farming practices, and sophisticated hunting strategies. These ancient mariners quickly drove the vast majority of Australia's unique megafauna to total extinction. Pretty dark, really. Furthermore, evidence of the deeply isolated islands to the north of Australia demonstrates that these early humans were not merely drifting aimlessly on logs. On islands such as Buka and Manu, which were separated from the closest landmass by a daunting 200 kilometres of open water, that's like a long way, there's a firm undeniable evidence of deliberate colonisation and regular long-distance sea trade. Sapiens living on New Ireland utilised obsidian, which is volcanic glass, for their tools, and strict laboratory tests have proven definitively that this obsidian originated from New Britain, some 400 kilometres away. The navigation required to sustain this prehistoric trade network heavily implies a highly sophisticated vessels, a deep understanding of ocean currents, and refined sailing skills. Harari's engaging historical narrative highlights this triumph of the human spirit, yet it bumps violently against a monumental archaeological gap. Absolutely no physical boat, no hull, and no sail from this era has ever been found. We're left with the genetic and ecological aftermath of a spectacular voyage, but the ships themselves have vanished entirely from the record. So the Sahul Enigma crossing the deep Wallace Line, the peopling of Australia, New Guinea and the surrounding islands, an ancient massive supercontinent known to geologists as Sahul, represents the first great maritime mystery of the human story. It's a puzzle that fundamentally challenges our timeline of human technological development. During the last glacial maximum, massive amounts of the Earth's water were locked up in immense continental ice sheets. Consequently, global sea levels plummeted to approximately 120 metres lower than they are today, exposing massive tracts of land and connecting mainland Asia to the Sunda itself. You could walk from modern-day Korea to Japan or from Siberia to Alaska. However, even at the absolute lowest ebb of the global sea levels, the supercontinent of Sahul was never connected to mainland Asia by a land bridge, they don't think anyway. They remain permanently separated by a deep water turbulent biological barrier known as Wallasey, named after the naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace. To reach the shores of Sahul, anatomically modern humans had to navigate a series of treacherous multi-day maritime crossings, including at least one terrifying open ocean voyage of 90 to 100 kilometres, where land would have been completely invisible over the curvature of the earth, so they don't know where the fuck they're going. For decades, a fiercely and highly polarised debate raged within the global archaeological community regarding the nature of this migration. Were these crossings deliberate acts of exploration by capable mariners, or were they merely the result of accidental drift, perhaps small, terrified bands of humans clinging to an uprooted vegetation swept out to sea by sudden tsunamis or monsoons? I doubt it. I doubt that, mate. Basically, recently, highly sophisticated advancements in ocean drift modelling and coastal viewshed analysis have essentially destroyed this accidental drift hypothesis, as I kind of just postulated. So advanced computer simulations demonstrate that the statistical probability of a viable breeding population randomly washing up on the shores of Sahul via oceanic drift is less than 5%. So unless a massive coordinated group of at least 40 adults were just swept out to sea simultaneously every few years, conversely, the models show that if ancient mariners actively chose a specific time of departure based on weather observation and even made minimal headway, 0.5 knots, going pretty quick for, a rowing boat, using rudimentary paddles, currents, or sails towards a desired destination, the likelihood of successful arrival and colonization skyrockets. The genetic and archaeological timelines further compound the awe-inspiring deliberate nature of this feat. The extensive excavations of the Majabebe rock shelter located in Australia's Northern Territory have unearthed more than 10,000 artefacts, including what we are believed to be the world's oldest edge-ground hatchets, grinding stones for processing plants, and highly reflective ochre crayons used for symbolic and artistic expression. Crucially, researchers utilising advanced optically simulated luminescence (OSL) technique that measures the last time a mineral grain was exposed to sunlight, allowing for dating far beyond the 50,000-year limit of standard radiocarbon dating, have placed human occupation at the Majabebe site at the staggering 65,000 years ago. Quite a long time. Genomic evidence gathered from the DNA of present-day Aboriginal Australians and Papuans strongly supports this long chronology of migration. The genetic data indicates that an unbroken continuous lineage stretching back 60,000 to 65,000 years, confirming that Indigenous Australians possess the most ancient unbroken ancestry of any group of people living outside of Africa. Furthermore, deep DNA analysis reveals that these ancient mariners did not make the journey alone. Along the way, they encountered and interbred with Denisovians, an enigmatic archaic human species whose genetic legacy still flows in the veins of Aboriginal Australians today. The data unequivocally dictates that around 65,000 years ago, highly skilled, cognitively advanced seafarers made daring, deliberate blue water crossings. They navigated by the night sky, understood the invisible pull of currents and oceans, and successfully transported viable populations across the sea. Yet, despite the sheer scale, success, and profound ecological impacts of this migration, the archaeological record remains frustratingly, deafeningly quiet on the vehicles they used to conquer the deep. The missing fleet, a chronological incongruity. Study of ancient human migration relies heavily on resilient materials like lithic artifacts, so that's stone tools, fossilized bones, and in the model area, the miraculous preservation of DNA. However, the organic materials absolutely essential for ancient watercraft like wood, animal hide, woven sinew, bamboo, and kelp are highly perishable. They decay rapidly, rarely survive in the archaeological record unless they're lucky enough to be preserved in a highly specific oxygen-free environment such as deep peat bogs or frozen tundra. To illustrate the sheer scale of this incongruity, consider the timeline of human maritime achievements mapped against actual physical evidence of boats. You might know that I don't really like reading tables on these videos because it's kind of really boring, and you can just put the prompt into yourself or just go find yourself. I don't know. Yeah, as the table starkly illustrates, there's a gaping, magnificent temporal void extending for hundreds of thousands of years, where humans and their archaic hominin cousins were actively, successfully crossing oceans. Yet the earliest surviving boat ever discovered by modern science, a relatively primitive dugout canoe found in the Netherlands, is only 10,000 years old. So we're forced to kind of reconcile the fact that humans possessed a sophisticated technology to cross 100 kilometres of the Pacific Ocean 55,000 years before the oldest surviving physical evidence of a boat. So the lack of physical evidence creates a highly fertile ground for intense scientific debate, allowing anomalous genetic discoveries from other continents to cast shadow of doubt over the entirety of established global migration timelines. So next bit talks about echoes across the ocean, so the Americas and genetic anomalies. So if the peopling of Australia presents a profound mystery of invisible boats, the peopling of the Americas introduces a series of genetic anomalies that threaten to completely rewrite the geographic maps of human ancestry. So the orthodox textbook narrative of human expansion dictates that North and South America were the very last major land masses to be settled by Homo sapiens between 23,000 and 50,000 years, 15,000 years ago, as the Ice Age gripped the modern hemisphere. Nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers from northeastern Siberia crossed the Bering Island Bridge, Beringa, a vast grassy tundra exposed by lower sea levels, into modern-day Alaska. From there, the traditional theory held that they filtered down through a narrow, ice-free inland corridor east of the Rocky Mountains. However, recent geological and archaeological discoveries have heavily favoured coastal migration route. As the Cordilleran ice sheet began to melt, these first Americans sailed down the Pacific coastline along a highly productive kelp highway, using boats to navigate nearshore ecosystems, bypassing the imperishable ice walls of the interior and reaching sites as far as Monteverde in Chile, and thousands of years earlier than they previously thought. This coastal migration theory normally requires capable mariners navigating the frigid waters of the North Pacific, yet this updated boat-dependent theory of Beringian migration cannot adequately explain the spectacular genetic anomalies recently unearthed by deep sequencing of ancient and modern Native American genomes. So, the Amazonian secret, the ghost of population. Why? In 2015, two independent paleogenomic studies rocked the anthropological world to its core. Researchers, including teams led by Harvard Medical School's David Reich and Pontus Skoglund, discovered a shocking genetic signature hidden deep within the DNA of isolated indigenous tribes living in the Amazon rainforest, specifically members of the Surai, Caritania and Savante peoples of the Brazilian plateau carry a distinct, undeniable genetic signal that's entirely absent in almost all other Native American populations. So this genetic marker does not link them to expected Siberian or East Asian ancestors. Instead, it links them directly to Australasian populations, so indigenous Australians, Papuans from New Guinea, and the isolated Onge people of the Andaman Islands in the Bay of Bengal. The researchers sort of dubbed this unknown deep time ancestral group that contributed to Australasian DNA's population Y, after a word I can't pronounce, Yipkira, word meaning ancestor. So I thought they were doing the opposite then. A word meaning ancestor in the indigenous Tupi language family. The mystery of population Y is mind-dilating in its implications. How did the DNA of Australasians, people originating in the tropical islands of the South Pacific, end up concentrated almost exclusively in the deep Amazon basin, halfway across the planet? If one strictly follows a standard Beringian overland migration model, the ancestors carrying the population Y signal must have travelled from Southeast Asia up through the frozen Siberian Arctic, across the Bering Land Bridge, and then down through the entirety of North America, across the Panamanian Isthmus, and deep into the South American jungle. Yet, if they made this epic overland trek, they somehow managed to do it without leaving a single genetic trace along the way. So the population Y signal is virtually non-existent in modern or ancient Siberian populations. And aside from a faint race in the Capacar people of Costa Rica, it's entirely absent in North and Central American indigenous groups. As geneticist Pontus Skoglund bluntly noted regarding this search for this ancestral DNA, we've done a lot of sampling in East Asia and nobody looks like this. It's an unknown group that doesn't exist anymore, basically. So the absolute absence of a genetic trail stretching through North America logically invites the controversial hypothesis of a direct trans-Pacific maritime migration. Did an ancient, highly skilled seafaring culture sail directly from the South Pacific or Polynesia to the western coast of South America thousands of years ago? Don't know. Leave a link, leave a question in the comments if you're interested. I mean, yeah, there's a tantalising circumstantial evidence of later transoceanic contact. For example, the sweet potato, a plant strictly native to South America, was widely cultivated across Polynesia long before European contact. According to the tripartite hypothesis, phylogenetic analysis supports at least 2 separate introductions of the sweet potato from the Americas into the Pacific, implying that either Polynesian navigators reached South America and returned with the crop, or that indigenous Americans sailed to the Pacific. Similarly, disputed evidence suggests that certain pre-Columbian chicken bones found in Chile carry Polynesian DNA, but paleontologists, paleogeneticists generally caution against attributing deep population Y signal to these more recent Polynesian voyages. So the population Y signal is incredibly ancient. It's found in South American skeletal remains dating back over 10,000 years, so long before the known settlement of remote Polynesia. Therefore, mainstream scientists are forced to theorise highly complex multi-wave overland migrations from structured Northeast Asian source population that subsequently went entirely extinct in Asia, leaving the Amazonians as the sole living inheritors of this ghost DNA. Nevertheless, the sheer geographic distance, the highly isolated concentration of DNA in the Amazon, and the absolute lack of intermediary genetic breadcrumbs leave the door wide open to thousands of advanced ancient seagoing vessels successfully crossing the immense Pacific Ocean long before the dawn of written history. So, Haplogroup X, the Levantine link, and the Great Lakes. While South America contends that the Australasian mystery of population Y, North America possesses its own spectacular incongruous genetic puzzle, the mitochondrial DNA of Haplogroup X. Mitochondrial DNA, that's mtDNA, is passed down exclusively from mother to child, allowing geneticists to trace ancient matriarchal migration patterns with stunning accuracy. So Native American populations are overwhelmingly dominated by 4 primary mtDNA, not MDMA, all you naughty people, haplogroups A, B, C, and D, and all 4 of these lineages trace neatly and predictably back to East Asia and Siberian origins, so perfectly aligning with the Beringian migration theory. However, genetic sequencing reveals that a significant percentage of North American indigenous tribes, most notably the Ojibwe, I hope I said that right, and Algonquin people residing around the Great Lakes region, possess a prominent 5th maternal lineage, a haplogroup X, which is specifically the subclade X2A. Haplogroup X is a profound anomaly. It's not of Siberian, East Asian or Australasian origin. It's the definitive Eurasian lineage. Outside of the Native American tribes in the northern United States and Canada, the only other place on earth where haplogroup X is found is in highly elevated, distinct levels, is among the deeply isolated Druze populations who live in Galilee, Lebanon and northern Israel. So the sudden presence of a Middle Eastern or Eurasian genetic marker concentrated deep within the North American indigenous populations has spawned fierce academic battles with fueled countless alternative historical theories, because the parent haplogroup X is largely absent in the East Asia and Siberia. So how possibly did they cross the globe to reach those Great Lakes? The failure of the Saltrian hypothesis, one of the most prominent academic attempts to explain the presence of European and Eurasian markers in North America, is the highly controversial Solutrean hypothesis. championed by archaeologist Dennis Stanford and Smithsonian Institution Bruce Bradley. This theory posits that the very first humans to populate the Americas did not walk across the Beringa from Asia, but rather sailed across the Atlantic Ocean from Europe. Specifically, Stanford and Bradley argue that around 21,000 years ago, during the freezing depths of the last glacial maximum, the Solutrean people of prehistoric France and Spain migrated to North America by navigating along the edge of the pack ice that spanned the North Atlantic. The hypothesis relies heavily on the striking, undeniable morphological similarities between the advanced overshot stone tool flaking techniques of the Solutreans in Europe and the later Clovis culture points found across North America. If European seafarers successfully crossed the Atlantic 20,000 years ago, it could neatly simultaneously account for both the sudden appearance of advanced Clovis-lithic technology and also the Eurasian haplogroup X DNA found in the Great Lakes regions. However, despite its elegant solution to the genetic anomaly, mainstream archaeology almost universally rejects the Solutrean hypothesis. The primary objections are devastating. There's a massive temporal gap of thousands of years between the disappearance of the Solutrean culture in Europe and the emergence of the Clovis culture in America. More importantly, for this analysis, there is a complete, absolute absence of any physical evidence for Solutrean seafaring technology. There's just no petrified wood boats anywhere. There are no boats, there's no nautical tools, there's no evidence of a maritime culture capable of surviving a brutal months-long journey along the treacherous Atlantic ice sheet. So furthermore, you've got like a strict genetic analysis severely undermines the transatlantic link. So geneticists argue that the specific X2A subclade found in Native Americans diverged from the Eurasian X lineages tens of thousands of years before supposed Ice Age voyage. So this timeline suggests that the ancestors carrying haplogroup X must have been part of an ancient, highly mixed population that lived in Central Asia or Siberia, crossed the Bering Land Bridge with the other indigenous ancestors, and subsequently went entirely extinct in Asia, leaving no trace behind. Yet again, much like the explanation for population Y in the Amazon, the orthodox scientific explanation demands the uncritical acceptance of a massive ghost population. So we must believe that a group of people successfully crossed an entire continent, deposited their unique Levantine-linked genetics in a highly specific location in North America, and then vanished perfectly without leaving a single genetic or archaeological trace along their Siberian migration route, which is, it's just, it's very unlikely. It's precisely within these gaping lacunae of the scientific record, the missing boats, the theoretical ghost populations, the teleporting DNA, and the inexplicable linguistic anomalies, such as researcher Stephen Jett noting that the Cherokee word karori, meaning leisure, mirrors the exact Greek equivalent. That radically alternative, spectacular theories of human history take firm root. So the next bit is entitled Before the Pyramids, the Vanguard of Alternative History. That's about a different book. It's not as good, it's not as credible, but it is worth reading. So do read it if you get a chance. It's cheap on Amazon and will stimulate your neurons. When orthodox science is forced to offer highly complex, heavily caveated models of invisible overland gene flow to explain transoceanic similarities without the acknowledging of the existence of boats, the restructuring intellectual vacuum naturally attracts diffusionism and sweeping alternative historical hypotheses. If early sapiens possessed the cognitive capacity to build elaborate myths, organize tribes, and extinguish megafauna, it's possible that the mainstream narrative of a slow, linear, primitive, ancient to civilization is fundamentally flawed. Or is it? It's a questioning. This is the central, highly provocative premise explored by researchers Christopher Knight and Alan Butler in their comprehensive work Before the Pyramids, cracking archaeology's greatest mystery. I don't think they do crack archaeology's greatest mystery in that book, but it is pretty good. Knight and Butler diverge radically from the primitive hunter-gatherer models of deep antiquity. They propose that a highly advanced, technologically sophisticated, and astronomically literate civilization thrived globally long before the cataclysms that ended in the last ice age. So where mainstream archaeology views the Neolithic stone circles and earthworks of Europe as the impressive but isolated work of early rudimentary agriculturalists, Knight and Butler analysed these structures through the rigorous lens of sophisticated geometry and celestial mechanics. They present a wealth of data suggesting that builders of these prehistoric European sites, basically mud, circular mud things, like built out of mud and they're in a circle. You put a sextant in the middle and you can see stuff like, find out on Google what a sextant is. You know, they present a wealth of data suggesting that the builders of these prehistoric European sites possessed an exacting universal mathematical standard, which they term the megalithic yard, and an advanced understanding of the Earth's 360-degree circumference and sphericity thousands of years before the Egyptians built the pyramids. Astrological, navigation and megalithic footprint. So according to deep structural analysis by Knight and Butler, monumental henges in the British Isles, such as the massive Thornborough henges in North Yorkshire, about 3,500 years old, centuries before Stonehenge, were not mere tribal gathering spaces or primitive temples. They were in fact highly sophisticated astronomical observations and geodetic markers. So I've got a really dry mouth. I'm just going to get my vape actually. Wait there. It's on charge, I reckon. There you go, 85%. That'll do. I'll be able to get my fucking. So where were we? Geodetic markers that I couldn't pronounce. Astonishingly, their research claims that the layout of the Thornborough henges perfectly mathematically mirrors the alignment of the stars in Orion's belt, a specific celestial blueprint that was later famously replicated by the dynastic Egyptians at the Gaza Plateau. The authors assert that the complex astronomical calculations and precise surveying required to design the Egyptian pyramids could only have originated from the observational data gathered at the much older henge sites in Britain. So they conclude that the fundamental architectural and mathematical knowledge of the pharaohs was conceived and planned by a far older culture capable of mapping the celestial globe. The implications of such a unified, mathematically consistent ancient world, while often heavily classified as fringe theory or conspiracy by orthodox academic institutions, do offer a highly seductive, elegant solution for the seemingly impossible global distribution of ethnicities and genetic lineages. So if a pre-Ice Age or early Neolithic civilization possessed advanced celestial mapping, a unified metric system based on the Earth's circumference, and the organisational capacity to build megalithic observatories, they undoubtedly possessed the advanced transportation and seagoing vessels required to traverse the oceans. Navigation on the open sea, after all, is entirely reliant on the exact astronomical knowledge and the precise timekeeping that Knight and Butler argue these megalithic builders possessed. Knight and Butler's framework provides a direct hypothetical mechanism for transoceanic travel that beautifully bypasses the limitations of primitive dugout canoes. In this paradigm, the Australasian DNA found in the deep Amazon and the Middle Eastern haplogroups walking the shores of the Great Lakes are not the result of agonisingly slow multi-generational overland drifts by amnesiac hunter-gatherers who subsequently vanished. Instead, they are lingering genetic fingerprints of a globally connected, highly capable maritime civilization. So why is there no evidence of these ships? Proponents of these diffusionist theories point to the catastrophic climate shifts, glacial melting and massive sea level rises at the very end of the Pleistocene epoch, which would have drowned coastal cities, obliterated wooden shipyards and erased infrastructure of this maritime culture from the face of the earth. So the blueprint of a lost age. To accept the premise put forth by researchers like Knight and Butler is to accept that human progress is not a steady, unbroken straight line from the cave to the modern skyscraper. Rather, it implies a cyclical process of brilliant rise and catastrophic fall. It suggests that the cognitive revolution detailed by Harari bore profound technological fruit far earlier than orthodox historians are willing to concede. There's another table, fuck it off. While academia predictably bristles at the concept of a lost global civilization, frequently categorizing such ideas as pseudo-archaeology, pointing out that the lack of industrialized remnants, the dismissing claims of ancient white seafarers as politically motivated and undeniable structural anomalies of the orthodox view, allow these alternative theories to thrive as long as highly credentialated geneticists are forced to invent invisible ghost populations to mathematically explain how human DNA essentially teleported from Papua New Guinea to Brazil, the ghost fleets of an advanced star-charting megalithic culture will continue to capture the human historical imagination. So, Acoustic Seed, the Kelp Highway and global networks, adding yet another layer of complexity to the mystery of early human spatial distribution, is the merging intersection of genetics with linguistic and paleoclimatological modelling. So, in an effort to explain the population-wide anomaly in the Amazon without resorting to either ghost populations or lost Atlantean civilizations, some multidisciplinary researchers have sought to unify paleogenomics with the study of ancient languages. So, theories surrounding Acoustic Seed, a primordial cognitive and linguistic operating system characterized by high tonality, ergativity, whatever the fuck that means, and crucially maritime technology, suggests that early hominids expanded via established maritime conveyors out of the Rift Valley and across the globe. The unified systems model approach posits a radical shift in perspective. Ancient human populations were not isolated, fearful bands trapped by geography, but were actually far more fluid and dynamically connected by utilising ocean currents than previously believed. If this model holds true, the vast ocean were never a terrifying barrier to early Homo sapiens. They were the original global superhighways. We can see the physical logic of this in the Kelp Highway. So the hypothesis regarding the peopling of the Americas, leading archaeologists like John Ellenson and have demonstrated oceanographic conditions during the last glacial maximum, about 18 to 24,000 years ago, would have actively, continuously facilitated boat journeys along the entire perimeter of the North Pacific. So weak opposing coastal currents and extensive winter sea ice could have allowed maritime hunters to leapfrog safely from island to island. They would have followed a continuous, ecologically identical kelp forest ecosystem stretching from the shores of Japan across the Bering Sea and all the way down to the coast of the Baja California, harvesting incredibly rich marine resources along the way. This is not just mere speculation. It's kind of like it says the ancient Japanese Shomon culture, for instance, shows clear archaeological evidence of using boats to procure precious obsidian from offshore islands located 50 kilometers away as early as 21,000 years ago. So the capacity to sail, to hunt deep water pelagic fish, and to survive the chaotic freezing swells of the ocean Pacific requires a mastery of technology and environmental that we, sitting comfortably in the 21st century, drastically underestimate in our ancestors. So it requires the weaving of watertight hulls, the precise calculation of seasonal weather patterns, the understanding of celestial navigation, and the faithful transfer of complex, life-saving generational knowledge entirely without the aid of the written word. So it's like just it like kind of makes you scratch your head a bit, like I just did. So conclusion: the horizon of amnesia. When reviewing the breathtaking totality of the evidence, the cognitive leap of early sapiens that allowed for the creation of complex fictions and tribal cooperation, the undeniably deliberate peopling of Australia across 100 kilometres of deep ocean 65,000 years ago, the haunting Australasian DNA locked away in the blood of the Amazonian Suri, and the Levantine genetic echoes wandering the shores of the Great Lakes, a profound and slightly unsettling realisation sets in. The human family is suffering from a severe species-wide amnesia. The empirical, carbon-dated evidence demands that we acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. Our ancestors were undisputed masters of the sea tens of thousands of years before we have any physical proof that they even knew how to carve a simple boat. The archaeological record is effectively a magnificent history book with its most important dramatic chapters violently torn out. We are left only with the faded footprints on the shores of distant islands and the microscopic undeniable data encoded within human blood. Did the ancestors of the Amazonian tribes navigate the deep, endless Pacific in primitive, brilliantly engineered rafts, driven by a cognitive revolution that made them believe they could conquer the horizon, or were they, like researchers like Knight and Butler fervently suggest, the descendants of a highly advanced cosmologically sophisticated global culture that mapped Earth's circumference and sailed the oceans with calculated precision long before the first block of limestone was cut at Giza. The absolute absence of carbon-dated seagoing vessels is not proof of their non-existence. Rather, it is a sobering testament to the devastating erasing power of time, organic decay, and the rising tides of the Holocene that drowned the entire world. As genetic mapping becomes exponentially more precise, the anomalies in our history are multiplying, not shrinking. These strict linear borders of human migration are dissolving into a fluid, highly complex maritime web of interactions we can barely begin to fathom. Somewhere beneath the crushing weight of the modern oceans, buried deep under millennia of silt, sand and coral, lie the rotted silent remnants of the first great human fleets. Until those spectral ships are finally drawn from the depths, the true, complete story of how the restless children of Africa became an absolute masters of the earth will remain exactly what it is today, a spectacular, enduring and beautiful mystery. That's just some nice, mind-blowing shit. Keep angle, what the fuck that means. Yeah, mental, isn't it? Absolutely mental. Basically, if they had like anti-gravitics or teleportation, then it probably could have done it. And, you know, they probably could have built things like Machu Picchu and like, you know, the Cheops pyramids and stuff like that. And probably been to other like interstellar communities and I don't know what they're called, like in Hinduism, yugas, I think they're called, which is like 27,000 year cycles. Fuck knows how they work that out. If you put a sextant as a thing, it's not like a porn thing, it's a navigational thing. Look, it's sort of like, you might, like, you know, quantity surveyors, you seen those guys? Or like, not quantity surveyors, like, well, just like surveyors. They have like a tripod thing that they like have a camera on it, it's got a laser on it, and they sort of like do fucked up stuff with it. So it's a little bit like one of them, but it's on like a pivot. So yeah, it like, it's like a curved thing. A sextant, just Google what is a sextant and then Google anti-gravitics and teleportation. Have a fucking lovely Sunday, and yeah, come visit me. I've got this book now, Alan Sugar, What You See Is What You Get. It got left behind by one of the guys that were there. Just happened to have it in his room. Really good book. What have I got here? My dad's death certificate as well. I won't show that too closely to the camera. Bye everybody, thanks for watching. Love you, cheers.